Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank Südwind for inviting me and for giving the International Organization of Human Rights in Iran this opportunity. The focus of previous reports by international organizations to preserve human rights at these meetings were usually on specific cases and items of violation of human rights in Iran. However, in the current session, I would like to represent a short report on the disastrous situation of the judiciary in Iran in order to shed further light on the root causes of violation of rights of Iranian citizens that we sadly witness on a regular basis. According to Winston Churchill and those who study governments, if most of the institutions in the country are corrupt, with the exception of the judiciary, then there still exists some hope for transformation of the country into a healthy system. However, if the corruption also overtakes the judiciary, then there is no hope for the reform of the system. Unfortunately, as shown by countless examples that are available, the Iranian judiciary has become a totally corrupt institution that is no longer independent. As a result of this systematic corruption, it is simply another extension of the underground security groups that have been institutionalized due to corruption throughout the judiciary. Therefore, the judiciary has become simply a tool in the hands of different mafia-type groups that vie for power within Iran. To clarify this statement, I will review a few simple examples of the types of behavior I mentioned by the Iranian judiciary which occurred just in the past year. My first example concerns the case regarding audio files of the meeting between Ayatollah Montazeri and members of judiciary that took place in the summer of 1988. In these tapes, the members of the judiciary addressed Ayatollah Montazeri in his capacity as the second highest authority in the country with regard to executions of political prisoners without a trial or trials that at best lasted only 3 minutes. In these recordings, Ayatollah Montazeri calls the death sentences crimes against humanity and those who sought those sentences as criminals. However, after the release of these audio files in the past year, the reaction of the judiciary was a very important indicator in terms of the level of corruption and obedience to the underground security groups that run Iran. As the Minister of Justice, in response to these recordings, refers to the death sentences of 1988 as God's judgment and that he is personally proud of these executions. Also in response to this release of these tapes by Ahmed Montazeri, the son of Ayatollah Montazeri, the judiciary promptly prosecuted him and sentenced him to 21 years in prison, and he was subsequently detained. However, because of the reaction of the independent media and the pressure exerted by them, Ahmed Montazeri was freed the next day, as it became clear that even the supreme leader of Iran was opposed to the arrested Ahmed Montazeri. From that day on, it became clear that the judiciary is in complete control of Ebrahim Raisi, the former Attorney General and current member of Assembly Experts, who was one of the members of the judiciary responsible for execution of political prisoners during 1988. Also, through Raisi's actions, it became clear that he does not even listen to the supreme leader of Iran. This event clearly shows that Iran's judiciary is in the hands of the same people who executed more than 30,000 political prisoners during the summer of 1988. Other examples of injustices include the reaction of the judiciary towards the charges of rape and child molestation against Saeed Tusi, who happens to be the favorite Quran reciter of Khamenei. According to charges received so far, there have been 19 charges of child molestation and rape filed against Tusi, who under the pretext of teaching the Quran would get close to the children and then would sexually assault them. It's only due to Tusi's closeness to the supreme leader and the inner circle of people whose leader is Ebrahim Raisi in Khorasan that the charges against Tusi have not been processed. Despite the shots of practitioners and children who have been raped, none of the cases have been investigated, and in fact there are some talk of acquitting of Tusi of all charges despite the pleas of victims and plaintiffs for judicial investigation. What this means in all practicality is that judicial system is a tool in the hands of rapists. Other examples of injustices committed by the judiciary is the judiciary's treatment of the number of the crimes and prisons abuse charges heralded against former prosecutor Said Mortazavi. Under these charges, Mortazavi, through freely issuing commands at Kahrizak prison, was directly responsible for the death and abuses of dozens of prisoners. It is interesting to note that while on one hand, in complete disbelief, we have seen Said Mortazavi has been acquitted of all charges, on the other hand, we can clearly also see the unjust treatment of judiciary of numerous innocent victims like Dr. Muhammad Ali Tahiri, Ayatollah Nekunam, Mir Hossein Mousavi, Mehdi Karoubi, Zahrawat, and thousands of other innocent political prisoners. In fact, it has been more than a year since the end of the prisoner sentence of Mr. Tahiri, and over 8 months In fact, it has been more than a year since the end of the prison sentence of Mr. Tahiri, and over 8 months since the same judiciary prohibited reissue of new charges against Mr. Tahiri, and yet he is still being held in prison illegally, while there are fresh efforts to retry Mr. Tahiri on same old charges. Furthermore, it has been seven years since that Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi and Mrs. Rahnavard have been under house arrest without trial. Then we also have the case of Arash Sadiqi. Has been 7 years since that Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi and Mrs. Rahnavard have been under house arrest without a trial. Then we also have the case of Arash Sadiqi, who is imprisoned despite the doctor's orders that clearly state he needs to be hospitalized, as his life is in danger. All the while, the judiciary ignores his critical condition and keeps him in prison. There is also the case of Ayatollah Nekunam, who's been wrongly imprisoned for years, simply because of his wish to practice a peaceful and mystical version of the Islam. There are countless other examples of unjust practices by Iranian judiciary which go to show that the judiciary in Iran is merely a tool in the hands of torturers, murderers, and rapists which govern Iran. The last point I would like to discuss concerns the head of judiciary, namely Sadiq Larijani. Recently, we saw that the independent media uncovered 63 personal accounts belonging to Sadiq Larijani, and the disclosure that money paid to the judiciary system from various sources, such as penalties, was directly deposited to these personal accounts. Therefore, not only the judiciaries have benefited from these payments, but Sadiq Larijani has directly profited from these payments and the billions of dollars of interest and profit that these some have earned over their years. Therefore, when a person shots at the head of the judiciary as a direct beneficiary of the corruption within the judiciary, it only goes to show the astronomical dimensions of corruption within the Iranian judiciary. All of which illustrates that the judiciary is simply a powerful tool of repression at the hands of the mafia-type group that control Iran and the scope of influence of Mashhad group within Iran. To quote the President Rouhani, if salt is used in order to prevent the food becoming rotten, God forbid when the salt itself becomes rotten. Yes, unfortunately today the corruption within the judiciary in Iran has been institutionalized and the Iranian people have lost hope, and that is why we have come together here. Therefore, the International Organization to Preserve Human Rights asks that the United Nations acknowledge these reports and the reports of other international human rights bodies, and puts the Iranian judiciary under pressure, as this institution is mainly responsible for the oppression and corruption within Iran. Thank you very much.